Good morning, and thank you for staying with us. You're tuned in and listening to Smooth 98.1, Smooth Breakfast with Valentine.
And Ayo Myra say good morning, Lagos.
Good morning. It's time for Freshly Pressed 981, where we give you detailed analysis of the newspaper stories this morning. We have eight headlines to go through, eight stories to go through. We have Lone Ranger, the man is capable to take on the stories alone. His name is Balaho. Is that Mr. G Quest? Good morning, Balaho.
Good morning, Valentine. Good morning, Ayo. And good morning, Lagos.
Good morning. The first point of call is for messages. Just a reminder, the WhatsApp number is 0809 for your messages.
And then on Twitter, we're at Smooth981FM. Please use the hashtag FreshlyPress981 for us to easily track your messages. And then on YouTube, we're streaming live. Subscribe to our YouTube page, search for Smooth 98.1 on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. The first story is about budget. Comes as no surprise. A story from Premium Times, the report that is Nigeria to spend a quarter of 2020 budget on debt payments. The proposed 2020 budget, 10.3 trillion naira in size spending plan. They've presented to the National Assembly. The president presented this yesterday, making it the biggest or the highest so far. 2.5 trillion naira out of this amount is to service debts. Balahan, your thoughts on this story?
Well, let me start by saying that I should congratulate this current government for this feat that they've done. This is the first time that we will be seeing the president present the budget this early in the prior year before the budget. So usually the budget has always been presented in December, and of course we know what tends to happen when the budget is presented in December. It doesn't get signed and approved until maybe middle part of the year. So this time around we're seeing it being presented in October. So we're hoping, and it has been said by the Senate that they will be passing the budget hopefully by November. So kudos to the government for that. They've done one thing correctly, and we have to commend them when they do certain things right. Now, going on into the budget, now we're talking about the budget, which is 10.3 trillion naira. And what we have here is that, as usual, we're going to be spending 2.5 trillion servicing the debt. And when we're talking about debt servicing, this is not exactly paying back the capital. This is just paying the interest only and servicing the debt. Our debt profile as at present now, we're talking about 25 trillion naira, which is the equivalent of about $81 billion is what we're owing at present now. So we're not even talking about touching that payment. We're only talking about servicing the debt. And of course, there's been a lot of clamor as to we've been servicing debt for so long, and the debt servicing is on the increase. Our debt is rising as well. And of course, what this translates to is that the future generations are going to be responsible for the payment of this debt. It's not a problem borrowing money to grow the economy or to fix infrastructure. The problem that we do have is the problem of seeing value for that money that we have borrowed. I mean, this current debt 2020 budget, it has been stated by the presidency that, I'll quote what has been said. The purpose of this 2020 budget is to strengthen the country's macroeconomic environment, human capital development, and develop our critical infrastructure and enhancing administration of social investment program. All of these are very good if we're looking at developing our infrastructure. We know we do have an infrastructure deficit in the country. We also do know that we also have a deficit when it comes to human capital development. It's important that we need to develop the people, because it's only when we develop the people that the economy will be able to grow and our society will be better off for it. But the problem that we have is that we're not seeing, it's 4 years on after this government is coming into office, and we're still yet to see the impact of this budget, the huge budget spending. And so we're waiting to see the impact of the budget.
You're clearly not satisfied with the enumerations of the successes that the government has put forward in the past 4 years.
I haven't actually seen the impact yet, because what we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about education, we're talking about the roads. Have you seen the states of our roads?
Well, the budget for construction for transportation alone is almost double the size of the budget for health. and that of education as well. Well, thank you, Bola, for your analysis in this one. Let's move on very quickly, but quick messages here.
Vincent Mecca from Adeba says our national budget is a mere academic exercise.
Absolutely.
What has been budgeted year in, year out never has any impact on the citizens. The budget is for the elites
Yep.
in the society. And then MI from Akoka says 25% debt servicing in a world that is slowly moving away from oil. We can't be so optimistic with estimated revenue which we don't control the prices anyway. I also pray we don't drown citizens with overbearing taxes. If transportation gets more money than education, no pun intended, where exactly are we going?
Critical question. It's just some of the questions analysts are saying. Analysts are calling the budget largely optimistic. Someone's group is not as optimistic as should be as PDP, as the opposition, major opposition party. From the Vanguard, the reports that PDP challenges Buhari to make presidency allocation details public. They're saying that describing the appropriation bill as hazy, quote, showing streaks of padding, fraudulent duplication, replete with false performance indices, deceptive projections, and inexplicable expenditure assertions that create openings for continued looting. For a government that is taken as one of its champion in the cause for fighting corruption, how do you see this playing out in the reaction? Do you see a reaction coming soon? What is yours, first of all?
Well, my opinion on this is that yes, we do understand the role of the opposition. We understand that PDP is an opposition, and normally what the opposition should do is obviously counter what the government is doing. But what is expected is that you should be constructive about your criticism of the government. You don't just go full gun ho and start criticizing the government without any substantial evidence to back it up with. Well, right now, what the spokesperson of the PDP, that is Kola Ologbondoyan, is saying is that, which is what we've just said earlier on, is that the current budget now is only for a few minorities, it's only for the elite. That normally what you would find out is that currently Nigerians are not feeling the impact of the budget. That's according to his statement, and that's his own view. And that what you have at current or at this present moment is that the situation that we're having is that the citizens and the masses are bearing the brunt of the overspending from the government, and they're not really feeling the impact of.
You expressed similar views in your last analysis.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So
your words, the way that it's not being felt. You haven't seen the impact of the developments or strides that the government.
Absolutely. So he's supporting what I've just said.
Yeah.
Pretty much is what he's saying. Is that government needs to do a lot better in being transparent and in opening up their books and being more accountable and letting people see where all these budgets monies that are being budgeted are being spent on. Where is the infrastructure to show that we're spending 10 trillion naira? Where is the human capital development? I mean, what are we doing in terms of electricity, in terms of rail lines and all of that? We need to feel the impact of this budget. That is literally what the spokesperson is saying. But the only bit that I have with this article that was published is that when he now started talking about how we are seeing our foreign reserve at its lowest, and he's stating $41 billion as the lowest, I think, well, he needs to go and do a little bit more research, because that is inaccurate and that's not true. Of course, $41 billion is not substantial enough, and it only covers about 6 to 7 months of imports. But nevertheless, this is not being the lowest that we've had. We've had as low as $26 billion in 2016 and 17. So he needs to get his facts right on that. But he has stated some very, very valid points here, where he has talked about the paltry sums of $48 billion that has been budgeted for education, and 46 billion, sorry, not dollars, naira, I mean, and 46 billion naira that has also been budgeted for health. I mean, when we're looking at those paltry sums, how much impact is that going to have on a population of 200 million people? When we're talking about the education budget, if you divide that by 200 million people, you're probably going to be getting something within the region of about 500 naira or so.
Is this sustainable?
Yeah, exactly. What impact is that? So we need to do a lot more when we're talking about impact to the masses.
All right, thank you very much. But just very quickly, because I know the budget is in the news at the moment. If this were to be redistributed,
Yes,
how would you have better? Because number one, there's the issue of the amount being budgeted still too small for the
yes,
population of this size.
yes.
And then, of course, the individual line items at this amount has been budgeted. Which would you place more priority?
Of course, we know where our challenges lie. The problem that we have
Mm.
is that we have a huge government expense when we're talking about the recurrent expenditure,
Yeah,
where
and
our
service
government
budgets.
is over bloated,
Mhm.
and we're spending 70% of our budget on just running our government.
Mm.
So we need to redistribute that money into capital expenditure. I
Absolutely.
mean, my focus would be capital. Yes,
Yeah.
definitely, that's very important. And you also, when you're talking about capital too, you also need to start looking at the involvement of the private sectors.
Mm.
Government cannot do it all. We have a 30 trillion naira capital deficit.
Mhm.
So we need more money,
Mm.
and we also need the private sectors to come and play.
Mm.
All right.
All right, let's just very quick breakdown here. Works and housing got 262 billion naira, National Assembly 125 billion, Judiciary 110 billion, Power 127 billion naira, Transportation 123 billion, Universal Basic Education Commission and University Basic Education Commission 112 billion, Northeast Development Commission 37.83 billion, Defense 100 billion, Industry, Trade and Investment 40 billion, Social Investment Program 30 billion, Federal Capital Territory 28 billion naira, Health 46 billion naira, Niger Delta Ministry 24 billion naira, Interior 35 billion, Zonal Intervention Projects 100 billion, Agriculture and Rural Development 83 billion naira, Water Resources 82 billion naira, Niger Delta Development Commission 81 billion naira, Education 48 billion naira, Capital Projects 2.46
I mean,
trillion
I
naira.
mean, this caps it all.
Mm.
When you talk about it, how much is the National Assembly getting,
Mm.
and how much are we getting for the masses on health and education?
Comparatively.
When you combine those two together, they're not even up to what the National Assembly is getting.
Messages come to WhatsApp 0809 4440981. This is Freshly Pressed 981. Our next story.
All right,
Oh, before
Shegun
that.
says PDP should know about pardon and other accusations they've made for a party that left Nigeria with good roads, hospitals, and a good education sector after 16 years. We miss those years they were in power.
Mm.
All right, then Sebastian says,
Good morning, my people. You just said the truth. No impact on the monies the federal government spends from the budget. Let's move on to this one from the Daily Times news publication. Senate sets to shore up revenue by amending the PSC Act. That's the Production Sharing Contracts Act of 1993. They said they're desirous to increase in government revenue base and generating about 160 billion naira to fund the 2020 budget. This was revealed yesterday after the comprehensive debate on the motion moved by Senator Basi Akpan, that's representing Akwa Ibom Northeast. Your thoughts on this, Baron?
Well, it's a good development. Just as we've been talking about the budget, now we know that we have a budget deficit. We know that we need to borrow hugely, and we also do know that the government is trying to raise revenue. There's several ways at generating revenue. They're talking about the VAT increases and taxing people more. This is another way of increasing the revenue. Now, when we're talking about the production sharing contract of Act of 1993, what does that state? It states that the joint ventures that you have between the NNPC and the international oil companies, whenever oil is selling at the international market at more than $20 a barrel, then that differential between $20 and whatever the oil price is selling at, the government should be sharing that with the IOCs. But what has
As
happened?
international oil
Yeah, the
companies.
international oil companies. But what has happened in the past is that that difference, of course, has just been one way or the other not been mentioned, and it hasn't actually gone into the government coffers. And this has been going on for decades now. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of questions as to why we have missed this policy. This policy has been put in place, but the problem that we've had is that it had not been implemented, it had not been effected. And this is part of the problems that we have in Nigeria, where certain documents and certain policies would just be sitting down and we would not implement the policies. But now they've come to realize that we need more revenues and we need to act on this. So what they're now looking at is that, of course, they're looking at placing a fine on whoever violates all of this.
Mm.
And what the National Assembly is talking about now is that there's going to be a $50 million fine
Yes.
for international oil companies that violate all of these. And of course,
But does that include the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation? Do they fall under this fine?
well, the NNPC usually doesn't really go into exploration. What normally happens is that they just go into a joint venture with the IOCs. So normally the bulk lies on the IOCs to do. So it's important now to see that. And what they're talking about is that, of course, over the years, for example, last year they're saying that we lost 350 billion naira that we could have generated if this was already kicked in or if this was already in law. And so therefore, going forward now, they're hoping that they will be able to generate 160 billion naira from it.
Here's my question. My essential question is: if the agreements are gone into between the NNPC
Yes.
and for the Nigerian counterpart
Yes.
and the international
IOCs.
oil companies,
Yes.
IOCs are fined alone with 50 million naira dollar fine if they violate any of these agreements. What if the NNPC reneges on their own part of the agreement?
Well, then it's left for the government to find who has erred and who has violated these policies at the NNPC and bring them to book and prosecute appropriately. I mean, there should be consequences. I mean, there's also other debate on this bill that they're looking at, and the debate is that some people are also proposing that they increase that threshold to $35 a barrel, but it has been stated by the Senate president that we should leave it and benchmark it at $20 a barrel. And they're also hoping that this will be signed into law before the 2020 budget is signed into law as well, so that of course this can kick in 2020. Good move by the government, and by the National Assembly. We're looking forward to this because of course we know that we do need the money.
Yes, we do. We have a few messages.
All right. So Williams from Lekki says, "What are resources getting that amount of money to do what? The minister should explain what he did with the previous allocation."
And then we go talk about communication because that's something very essential here. From the Vanguard newspaper, we have this report: Nigeria ready for 5G. Communication Minister says Dr. Isa Pantami seems optimistic in the face of things. It says he knows that there are loopholes. He acknowledges the fact that there are loopholes, but at the pace, and this is me quoting him, at the pace we are moving, some places do not even have 2G. There are over 200 cluster areas in the country. And with this, you cannot say we can move to 5G when some people are yet to access 2G, 3G. How do you see them bridging this gap, Bolamo?
Well, I mean, this is the Minister of Communications speaking at a conference which is called GTEx, a global technology exhibition which was held at Dubai.
Yes.
And I mean, to me, the way I see it, my impression is that this is only just making a statement. Just as on one hand he was making the statement that Nigeria is ready to deploy 5G coverage, on the other hand he's also saying that there's some areas in Nigeria, and there are about 200 hotspots or so that is mentioned, or cluster areas, that are not even feeling the impact at the moment of 2G, 3G, and 4G network. So if you're having that challenge at the moment now, then why are we talking about 5G coverage? Of course, we know the impact of 5G. 5G, it will be faster. You would have better services and better value as well. But the problem is that some people are still experiencing challenges with 2G, 3G, and 5G. You can only point at certain areas, maybe Lagos, Port Harcourt, and Abuja, that are enjoying a lot of the 4G experience at the moment. I don't know any of us in this room who currently has the 4G network. I certainly don't at present.
Emeka from Amuwo says that he's sending his message with a fluctuating 3G, 4G
There you
signal,
go.
and now we want to go 5G.
There you go.
And that's the signal that you see. He's asking, are we jokers? That's a good question.
Yeah.
Because it seems like inflating a waterproof bag and just stuffing it in your bag with giving the appearance that it's full with useful materials.
Absolutely. I mean, some people will call it leapfrogging and jumping, but then why do we have to leapfrog all the time? We haven't sorted out the issues that we currently have, and the issues that we have is that we do not have enough coverage fiber optic network across Nigeria. We need to do a lot more better in that with the infrastructures first before we talk about 5G
regulation.
Absolutely, and that's another thing that we're having challenges with, the regulation There's no value for money yet.
All right, thank you very much, Ibola. Let's move on to this next one. It's an update on yesterday's story. It was trending. We spoke extensively on it, but just to give an update with regards to the Academic Staff Union of Universities, that's ASU, calling for investigation sanctions for the sector grade report. Now, for those who, this is from this day newspaper, for those who listened in and joined the conversation yesterday, we talked about the BBC Africa expose undercover investigative report by Kiki Mordi, which exposed how male lecturers sexually harassed young female students. Now, as to our calling for investigation sanctions, we know that already some things have been done to the primary focus in this report. But please, well, I'll take us through the story.
Well, I mean, we've all heard about the situation and the scandal that went on. And I first of all have to give kudos to the BBC for this investigation. I mean, Nigeria needs to do a lot more. Our journalists needs to do a lot more when it comes to investigative journalism. BBC were also the ones that also unraveled the issue with the drug abuses that we had in the past. Yes, all of that. I mean, we have in Nigeria a lot of social issues that need to be unraveled and need to be brought to the top for discussion and addressing the issues and looking for the way forward. I mean, a lot of us would not pretend as if this is the first time or that we're not familiar with the issues and challenges that goes on in the universities, that a lot of the university students are being abused by the lecturers who are meant to be custodians of the students in schools. When we talk about sex for grades, this is something that has been going on for years, and it's only just making front headlines now, and is making a lot of sensation and headlines now.
Well, what does that say about us as a people?
Because
considering the fact that this is in our face, like something that's strange.
Yes,
we see this. Why don't we speak out?
Well, I mean, when we look at the point of the victims first, it's the shaming that goes with it. What you normally find out is that rather than making people victims, you make them accomplices of these offenses. So what you would get is that you will get in situations where people would say, oh, the girls or the female asked for it, they were at blame, the way they were calling for it, the way they were dressed and all sorts of stuff. It was, it was induced is what you would get. And part of the reason is because we live in a male dominated society. We need to start addressing a lot of all these issues. We need to start looking at how we can make society better. And what society getting better is when everybody plays their role and has their own part to play, both male and female, young and old. Very important.
How about umbrella organizations like ASU? Because this report talks about them calling for investigation and sanctions, and they're the Academic Staff Union. So it's one of their colleagues, one of them that has been accused of it. What can ASU do? Because they talked about government intervention, talked about intervention on media, which BBC Africa have done, and we're doing right now. But what can the Academic Staff Union of Universities, what can they do?
Well, what you would expect the union and the academic union to do is that, of course, it's not only just paying lip service to this and just talking about it and condemning the act. It's for them to also their investigation in-house. Find out situations and people that are perpetrating such offenses, and then bring them to book. I mean, disciplinary actions should be meted out to such lecturers that are perpetrating such heinous crimes. They need to do a lot more. There needs to be a lot of investigation, and there also needs to be a lot more education and sensitization of the students and also the lecturers involved.
Thank you very much.
Message from Real One from Lekki. He says, still reacting to the 5G one. It says, laughing it out loud. 5G, wow. When my line is upgraded to 4G, yet the service looks like 1G. The appropriate measure should be put, and more effort should be made to get things to work. Shegun Fadari says, the media portrayal of ladies as sex toys in the entertainment industry is strong reason for this social ill. The entertainment industry is programming men's minds to see ladies as very cheap tools, let's begin to look at the psychology of the offenders themselves.
All right, thank you, Shegun. Let's move on to the next story. Now, an update on the Taraba killing of policemen has been blamed on communication gap, non-compliance to procedures. So we have this report or this update on the killing of 3 policemen and 2 civilians by soldiers along the Ibiukari Road in Taraba State in August. We dwelt on this story when it broke out, and now we have updates saying that it's due to communication gap, non-compliance to procedures. Can you please take us through this story from the Guardian?
Well, I mean, finally, we've gotten the conclusion of the investigation that was carried out by the Nigerian army, and then this was initiated by the president. Although I don't know why the president has to, first of all, initiate an investigation. It should be standard operating procedures for when you have situations of this nature. Automatically, there should be an investigation that should be carried out.
Especially now that we're trying to push forward the whole thing of decentralizing the police.
Absolutely. I mean, it shouldn't be directive coming from the top all the time, and that is what we talk about, institutionalization. Things should just work automatically. So we've gotten the investigation and the recommendations have also been put forward. Part of the findings, just as you've mentioned, is that they are talking about poor communication gap between the Nigerian police force and also the Nigerian army. And they have also talked about the violation of standard operating procedures,
Yes.
that the guidelines as to the rules of engagement or whatever they are standard operating procedures that they should have followed, and such procedures weren't followed. Further recommendations, so they've talked about improved communication. They've talked about also further investigating those that were involved. That's on the side of the military. They've mentioned quite a few names in this article of people that should be investigated and also brought to book for negligence, and disciplinary action should be meted out on them.
Right.
So we're waiting to see the further actions that will be taken in this. Then you also have some of the civil society organizations that have asked for compensation of the police officers, which I think the Nigerian army ought to do. They definitely need to be compensated.
All right, thank you.
Maya is reacting to the previous story. Thank you, Bolaho. Maya says, until there's punishment for men who abuse their powers, then this will continue. This is just university. How about workplace harassment? Thank you, Maya. Babatunde Scott sent us a link to a story that's where the Senate is looking at this bill, sexual harassment bill, that is, and
kicking against it. They had actually mentioned that in some universities it called that there should actually be a review of how women dress rather than the sexual harassment.
It's just a strong
That's
indication
exactly what I
of
said.
complicity in the highest order, on the highest levels of governance and administration, school administration.
That's why we must hold them to account. What are you doing? It's not enough to condemn the action. It's also what you're doing.
If there exists a cold room somewhere called a cold room in a university system, then it's clear indication that a lot of people are involved.
Although the code room is just a code name.
I know.
It's meant to be the staff room.
Yeah.
Staff quarters.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on to this story. Good news here. Lagos State honors policewoman who saved robbery victim's life. Vanguard newspaper reports. Act of kindness by SP Celestina Kalu, Divisional Police Officer of Ogudu Police Station in Lagos. She was rewarded by the Lagos State Governor, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu, who personally invited the police officer to the State House for honor and recognition. So this is what happened. She was able to save a young boy, Friday Ajabo, who was an orphan, who was shot by a 2-man robbery gang in Ojota. Not only did she intercept that robbery attack and him being shot, she also paid for his hospital bills, and the governor invited her to honor her. And sometimes we talk about the police in not so favorable light. So when things like this happen, it's good for us to talk about it, celebrate it. So we celebrate Celestina Kalu. Please just touch on this quickly.
It's very heartwarming and very touching to see that the governor is recognizing this police officer. It's a good gesture. This is what we need. We need to see more people, and we need to hear of such good news. Just as you've mentioned, it's not a lot of times that the Nigerian police makes a lot of positive news and headlines. So when they do, we need to celebrate it and we need to highlight the positives out of it. It's a good move. And the other thing I just wanted to touch on is that, I mean, this article talks about how the victim was wrestling with the perpetrators of this crime, and he got shot, and they made away with his bags. One thing that we need to know is that the value of life, we have to take that very seriously. We, at this present time, I've heard of series of robbery attacks on our streets, and the government needs to do a lot in terms of securing the lives of properties and lives in our society. It's very, very important.
And also speaking to hospitals who reject victims or gunshot wound victims. I mean, there was a time when I heard not too long ago that there was a law that was passed.
Yes, the president actually.
Yes, they made it criminal for hospitals to reject gunshot victims.
I think part of the problems that we have with that is that there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of paperwork that needs to be addressed. Because when such happens, when the police gets involved, there are numerous questions being asked, and
they almost make you feel guilty.
Exactly,
Them
exactly, and so that's why a lot of these hospitals reject such. So we need to do more.
Very quickly,
and the police
I have to
needs
just
to do
mention
more.
this. It's stated in the article that she was given a plaque by the governor.
Just a plaque.
That's
what comes with a plaque?
I'm just hoping that more, because we've seen people, and I won't mention names, who have just stayed in a place for a few days and rewarded so highly. So what's the reward for good conduct? Maybe we should think about that.
Well, we need to do a little bit better than that.
The police is your friend.
Yeah.
Thank you, Balahon.
You're welcome.
You're a friend here on Freshly Pressed 91. Balahon is at Mr. G Quest. Special thanks to every one of you who sent in messages on WhatsApp, Twitter, and YouTube. Ayo and myself, we're going to be here for the next show. It's called Locker Room 981, where we discuss sports in 15 minutes.
As if it's plaque, I will not.
You will not be so. I'm telling you, just a plaque. What's that?
This kind of